Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Skill Builder webinar. It's Ask the Experts, a conversation on real-world project management. I'm Allison Gonzalez with Essential Assets Group, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm honored to welcome three subject matter experts whose passion, believe it or not, is risk management: Dr. Douglas Brown, Mr. Carl Pritchard, and Mrs. Susan Parente. They're each well known throughout the project and risk management community for their expertise and contributions to the industry. They're educators, coaches, and consultants who bring a unique perspective to applying risk management principles for today's real world scenarios. As you know, Doug, Carl, and Susan are co-authors of the recently published Global Hotspots: How Project and Enterprise Risk Management Practices Drive Business Results Around the World. So again, welcome to today's webinar. I'd like to begin with each panelist just introducing themselves with a simple question. Doug, would you like to start? Maybe about 2 minutes or so. What makes you an expert in risk management?
Well, I guess having worked on many projects, I've run into many of the risks that you might expect. And so I've learned from that that quite often you see the same things over and over again. And after a while, you start to realize maybe there's a pattern here. And it'd be a good idea to take care of these things before they become problems rather than afterwards. So I became involved in risk management, like most of us, whether I wanted to or not. And I think as I started learning more about the practices of risk management, it appealed to me the idea that there was actually some ways to avoid not falling into the trap ahead of time.
Planning. Welcome, Carl. Would you like to introduce yourself? Same question. What makes you an expert in risk management?
Well, actually, it all started a very dramatic 27 years ago when the risk guy in our company quit. And my boss called me into his office and he said, "Hey, you heard he quit?" And I said, "Yeah, who's the new risk guy?" Yeah. And Ed looked at me and he said, "I am so glad you asked that." And terrified, because I had no background in risk management, I really didn't. But what happened then and what has happened ever since is I got thrown into the deep end of the pond. And ever since then, I've been swimming my way around. And as a result of having some of the most amazing clients on earth, learning their risk practices, as a result of actually having to do all the homework necessary to put out a couple of books, those kinds of things actually ultimately kind of turn you from temporary imposter into the real McCoy. And over 28 years, I've become the real McCoy.
Very unique. Susan, how about you? What makes you a risk expert?
Well, at first, I just have to say, Carl, just keep swimming. Just keep swimming.
Really?
So I actually was kind of thrown into it, not exactly like Carl was, but I was ending a contract at Washington Headquarters Services, and they were looking for placing us on other contracts, and the contract was a Missile Defense Agency, and the person who was managing the contract said, "Hey, I want you to come join our team and be the risk manager." And I was like, "The what?" And they said, "Risk manager." I'm like, "I'm not a risk manager. I'm a project manager, maybe a program manager." And he goes, "Well, you are now." He goes, "You manage projects, right?" And I go, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you manage risk then." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I'll put you in a class." And I actually took a class through George Washington University ESI, which is funny because Carl actually taught a class, but I didn't take Carl's class. But he actually taught that class. I know that. So it's funny how the world works. And I actually have my master's from GW also. But anyway, so I took this class, and I remember during the class, I was just like, wow, this is like made for me. I've been doing risk management my whole life since I was born. So it's sort of like it just framed my whole thought process. I am one of those people that is generally risk averse, And I'm always thinking what could go wrong and what am I going to do so things don't go wrong. So it just kind of framed it all for me. So it was perfect, but I got thrown into it. It wasn't something I had thought about.
It's funny. I not only taught the class, I wrote that class. So
Well,
yeah,
well, thank you, Ben.
you're
Yeah,
welcome.
it took like 20 something years later, but thank you.
You're welcome. It's a good thing.
And Carl, you were my instructor for PMP as well.
Wow. I do get around. I see my familiar student names on the roster here. So that's a good thing.
It's a big local community, the PMI, WDC chapter, and everything else.
Yeah, it is.
Well, no, that's great. I mean, welcome, guys. Thank you so much. Let's jump into the conversations about the different principles and what it means for organizations today, what risk means for organizations today. Doug, so where did you get the vision for global hotspots, and where did it come from? And if you do, why do you believe risk management is different today?
Well, it was very organic. I actually wrote a previous book that was just called Hotspots, and in the process of doing that, I spoke to a couple of folks, Carl and I think Susan, about, hey, would you guys contribute a chapter to this, because it's always better to have more really smart, capable professionals involved, rather than just have just my brain. And in the process, I think I mentioned to a couple of other people that we were doing that, and they wanted him to be involved too. And the next thing I knew, I had enough people that I decided, well, why don't we just make one book that's very amenable, that has got a lot of but practitioner discussions in it about how we do risk management. And it turned out that the people who were contributing to this were from multiple countries. So we thought, well, let's see if we can get around the globe and get a representative from each continent. We came close, but almost got there. Maybe on the second edition, we'll get another version that's filled in the blanks. So it kind of wrote itself from that point of view, and it became different looks from different practitioners who'd been brought up in many cases in different risk management frameworks, such as ISO or PRINCE and so on, as well as just the PMI frameworks that most of us here today started with. And the book grew itself from there. And then we left hotspots to become more, how do you manage, or how do you implement risk management at an enterprise level?
Absolutely. Susan, I had another question for you too. What one or two risk lessons are frequently learned the hard way?
Oh, well, creating a risk register is not managing risk. That's one that's learned the hard way. I was actually on a contract doing program risk management, helped the organization identify risks. We started looking at response planning. Of course, we assessed risk first, looked at response planning. That contract ended. I ended up coming back 6 months later on another contract, only to find the identified risks were now issues. So it's kind of what happens, especially the threat risk. There wasn't a lot of opportunity risk identification, but the threat risks that were identified actually became issues. And that's kind of what happens if you don't do any response planning to reduce those threat risks. So I call it the check the box risk management. Here, I have a risk register. I did risk management. It actually isn't risk management until you come up with response plans and actually implement them. So put them back into your project management plan, put it in your schedule, put contingency in your cost baseline, add activities to your scope and your WBS so that you're actually doing the things to reduce those threat risks. And if you can, also support those opportunity risks. So encourage them and make sure that those happen. The other thing I find, so that's one, I think you said you used a plural there, so I'll give you another one. The other big no that I find happening is people identify risks, and at the same moment they either assess them and say they're small, so we don't need to write those down, or they decide that they have a response plan for it, so they don't write it down. So they basically say, oh, don't worry about that risk. We already have a plan for what to do, or we're going to do this or that, so it's not really a risk. And so that means we're not tracking them. And so I remember, at the dentist office, there's a sign. My old dentist used to have this, that you only have to floss the teeth you want to keep. Well, you only need to identify the risks you want to manage. So if you don't identify the risk, you're not going to manage it, which means that it can come to fruition. If it's a threat risk, will become an issue, and you've done nothing about it. And that's that. So not identifying risk because it seems like it's a small risk or not really a big risk, or we already have a plan for it. You don't identify it, you're not going to track it, you're going to end up with an issue. So those two things are probably the most common things that I see happen.
Good. So managing at the enterprise level, it's got to be tricky when you have larger organizations and lots of different risks to track. Carl, how can project managers avoid the obvious mistakes or maybe the not so obvious ones?
Well, I actually think you just hit that when you said, just before you handed the ball over to me, when you said at the enterprise level, how do you actually do this across the enterprise? And that's the kicker, is most of the risks that organizations actually face and that convert to issues, most of them actually are things that we hit every single time. PMI in a mid-1990s study asked the question. They said, what is the most common risk on your project? And to a one, people who responded to this survey said fuzzy requirements, unclear requirements, ill-defined requirements. Call them what you will, but they were ill-defined requirements. And you know what? You can actually solve that at an enterprise level. And unfortunately, most people, rather than actually fixing that, they want to go find something dramatic. That's because risk should be dramatic. It should be exciting. There should be drum rolls and timpanis in the background, just risk. But the reality is, it's the really tedious, boring stuff like unclear requirements. Those are the things that actually bury us at an enterprise level, and can readily be repaired or at least modified or dealt with as an enterprise. Unfortunately, most people look at we know that's a problem and dismiss them. And this ties back to what Susan was saying. It's people know that it's a risk, but they do nothing about it. And it just makes you want to pull your hair out.
Is that how that happened, Carl?
What, the hair? Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty much. Yeah, fortunately, I'm still like winning the competition with Doug. That's the good thing.
It just turned my hair gray, so it's obviously different, maybe different gender type of effect that it has.
There you go.
Same risk, but different impacts.
Yep, different outcome.
I guess at the enterprise level, then, Doug or Susan, did you have any other comments about managing risk at the enterprise level?
Sure. For one, please do it. So it's like, how are organizations just dealing with risk at the project level and not at the enterprise level? I can't fathom that. I think we're all living right now at the impact of a risk that wasn't really maybe formulated, but I think that there's sort of some general risks that everybody dealt with that said, what if we can't go to our office for some extended period of time for some unknown reason? So we're all dealing with the impact of that. But how do we have an organization that doesn't deal with risks on an enterprise level? There's two things I think the enterprise should do. One is they should create some structure for how to deal with and manage risk inside of the organization, so there's consistency. Different projects, programs, and portfolios should not be reinventing the wheel on how to deal with risk inside an organization. It's also frustrating if you're on multiple projects and people are using different methods, different tools, different, probability and impact matrix, all these things, they should be consistent within the organization to some degree. So that should be there. And also educating people on risk management should be something at the enterprise level. But there should also be a vehicle for projects to escalate risk to programs and programs to escalate risk to portfolios or to the enterprise level where applicable. And without that, I just can't understand how an organization can run without having a concern for enterprise-wide risk. You can't just let everybody in the project take care of that and not have any concern at an enterprise level. It's just not workable.
And I think I would add to that the perspectives you get are completely different. I too have seen where most organizations require projects to do some sort of risk management, and each project goes off on a voyage of discovery. But one of the things that I attempt to emphasize is that risks are not risks, they are things that happen as a result of certain events happening or not happening. And generally speaking, they don't happen to just one project in an enterprise. So if one of them is seeing a particular external driver, then that same driver should be applying to multiple projects in the same enterprise. And you need to take an enterprise view so you can at least ask the other projects, hey, these guys are seeing massive changes in IT component prices. How come you guys aren't seeing that? And quite often the response only makes sense at an enterprise level. If you think you're going to have a vendor problem of some kind, having one project trying to deal with the same vendor the 32 entities across the organization are all using is not going to work.
Right, Joe. Sure. I mean, it's great to touch on those things. I'll go into the book a little bit at this point. Global Hotspots was actually authored by 10 risk management experts. And as you mentioned earlier, they really had experience on a global scale. As co-authors of Global Hotspots, I can imagine that your perspective of risk management may differ from each other still, even though you're looking at it from a very passionate perspective. You're all going to have a little nuance of what risk is to you. Susan, I'm sure you've read the book, so I'll ask you, which expert's chapter surprised you the most, either because of who wrote it or because of their perspective on risk?
I think I'm answering this question right, but I want to say the chapter 11, the organizational politics of risk management. And I guess I'm not surprised that there is such a thing, but surprised to see it in a book because you won't often see people talk about that. There are politics to risk management, and I've faced them on every contract that I've done risk management for. And I thought that was really interesting to have a chapter to address that and kind of give some strategies for how to deal with that too. So that was the most surprising. Not surprised that politics exists in risk management, but surprising to see it because I haven't, in all the risk management books I've read, I don't remember seeing one on the politics of risk management. So that was a part that I liked a lot. Also, of all the writing I've ever done, it's most enjoyable to read a book where parts of it you haven't written. So actually, it is a fun book to read. The chapters I didn't write, I think, were actually more fun for me to read than the one that I did write. There's actually two that I did write.
Interesting. Carl, if you were to write a sequel to one of the chapters, which one would you like to dive deeper into and why?
I think Dave Brown talking about the managing millennials entering the workforce. I think that's something that I hadn't thought of before as being a whole area of risk management, but I do now. And I think it's kind of compelling because it's a matter of not just the millennials, but pick your cultural group entering the workforce. As soon as you start talking about different cultural entities, every cultural entity has its own version of risk. And creating a risk culture is part of what I think we should be doing. And I think that's something we need to explore more thoroughly. And that is the fact that organizations, some of them actually establish a clear, well-defined risk structure. Probably the one I've seen that I had the honor of working with the most, where they really clearly knew what a risk culture meant and where it was supposed to go, was ABB, Asea Brown Bavarian, based in Västerås, Sweden. And just really impressive, because they knew the conversation they wanted to have. They knew how to structure the conversation. They had rules about how they're going to structure the conversation. Win, win, win. Just an awesome way to go about it. And I think you look at them, here's this big, giant global enterprise, and they're doing a lot of things right. And yet at the same time, you've also got these mom and pop shops who think, well, it doesn't apply to me because risk is something they do at a big global level. And nothing could be further from the truth. Other people are leveraging things like NIST's risk management framework. They take some of the basic stuff the government has created, and it's good stuff. And they're leveraging it and using it to create their own little project management risk management culture. And it's very small, and that's fine. We need to recognize what we're doing culturally to actually address the whole package.
Good. Doug, I think you talked a little bit about the other authors earlier, but can you talk a little bit about the book's contributors and what you found was compelling about the book once it was written?
Well, certainly the thing I found most interesting was that after discovering that we were going to be writing a book with people from different countries with different um, professional frameworks, such as the ISO and so on, I thought we might end up going in different directions, which would have been interesting. And I was somewhat surprised then to find that even with the cultural differences across countries and so on, that the issues and problems that they discussed were all very similar. And the nice part about that, I guess, is that as you read through the book, you're not hammered with 14 different ways to do something. Oh, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that, because they all really reinforce that the things that we know how to do now are probably the things that we should do. So that was pretty interesting. Your question was about the other authors. So we have authors from Russia, from Canada, from Brazil, from Australia, and so the one thing that is in common, I suppose, is that they're all, and the UK and Netherlands, is that all of these folks, if not primarily English speaking, do much of their business in an English speaking context. And I don't know whether that would affect what you might get if we were able to really hit up the Asian or African or, say, Arabic markets more. I don't know if that would come out differently, so that might have been an influence. But setting that aside, from all these different countries with all these different experiences in different industries, the answers came out to be kind of the same. Now, the one thing I did find surprising, to sort of piggyback on the question you had for Susan, was the Aboni's article about why risk management matrices are a bad thing. And I'm starting to see more and more of that kind of chatter going on in LinkedIn and other risk management communities. So that may be the discussion of the future is, so if not the red, yellow, green matrix, then what?
Okay. And you did jump ahead a little bit, in a sense. I was going to open those questions back up to the other panelists as far as just to talk a little bit about it. Which chapter surprised you the most? Which chapter would you like to dig deeper into? Or if there's something that you really found compelling or surprising? Susan, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
Well, I agree with Doug. I was sort of, we were each kind of doing our own thing, and Doug was doing a good job coordinating things, but I sort of was like wondering, how is this all gonna come together in a coordinated way? And it's funny because we all had sort of similar experiences from different perspectives, and the different chapters highlight different things. But one of my favorite things is that there is an emphasis on agile and risk, which you won't find in a lot of books. And I know that projects are moving more and more to using an agile approach, or at least in part. And so having that in here really makes it relevant and current to deal with risk issues we're having right now. And so we're not getting rid of risk just because we're using agile. Going back to what Carl said about scope, yes, that project uncertainty around scope is one of the biggest concerns, and that's why using an agile approach tends to work better if the scope is not clearly defined. However, that doesn't mean there's no more risk in your agile project. Even if you're using Scrum method specifically, that's the method often used. And it's interesting because years ago, when I was getting into doing some things with agile and agile user groups, nobody would talk about agile risk management. And I was like, this is crazy. Why is nobody talking about that? And so years forward, the conversation started getting more involved. I remember doing a search on agile risk management and I could barely find anything. And now I can find a lot. And part of that is because I've created some of those things and I've supported some of those things. So I'm really glad to see that we're looking at risk in a relevant way for different project approaches, not just traditional, but also in an agile approach. And it is really interesting how it all came together so well. And like Doug said, you would think that we would have these two totally different perspectives, and it's really not the case at all. Much of what I read in other countries and other people's experiences, which are very different from mine, a lot of the best practices and recommendations just really resonated. And this is a very different risk management book from the risk management books that I've read, and so I highly encourage people to read it on account of that, because it's not your typical risk management book, and that's kind of what makes it really great. And I think I'm thrilled to be one of a great group of risk management subject matter experts, and I just think it's a wonderful idea. So way to go, Doug. Thanks for coordinating that, and amazing how it came together.
Here, here.
Yep. Carl, did you have anything else to add on those questions?
No, yeah, of course I do. But realistic, yeah, it's like, yeah, if you allow me to open my mouth, I will. The reality is, I think a lot of this is, I think the thing that makes it so interesting is the fact that it's global hotspots, and yet we started narrowing in on, but never really hit at, because it was not a focal point of the book, a common language. ISO 31000 and RMF, the risk management framework, and so forth. They have language, they have glossaries. And I think realistically, if you want to really look at what's going to be the big breakthrough in enterprise risk management on a global level, it's when we all start talking the same language. You've got people all over the world, and it's funny because, again, I look at Dade Brown from the UK, and the classic line when I was teaching a class in the UK, I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to apologize. I speak American English. I don't speak British English." And one of my students stopped me and said, "Carl, actually, we just prefer to call British English English." I was like, oh, sorry, But it goes to, we have so many things where we could actually bring everyone together, have a common understanding, if we could just speak a unified common language.
Yeah. And one of the things when I read the book, one of the things that really hit me was it was really integrating risk at an enterprise level to deliver business value. And you don't always have the opportunity to link risk and business value until now. I think now the world is changing, and you actually have to deliver it from that perspective. I don't know. I mean, at this point, I think some of the things that, may come up in questions. What I'd like to do is, I think I kind of just did it, but I'll do it again, is I'll just do one quick round of any, I guess, final comments, and then I'll do a quick, a quick pause about Essential Assets Group and about the panelists, and then I'll open it up for questions. So feel free, anyone on the line, if you'd like to use a chat box and start putting in some questions, you can put them in there. And if you'd like to unmute at the end, I can call on you and we can do it that way as well if you have a question you'd rather ask. But we can try and address them that way. I think that'll be good. I'll switch over to your little bio page here, Doug. And if you'd like to just any final thoughts? Did not work.
Actually, my brain just got consumed with that point that Carl made. Maybe our next book is we'll do a translation dictionary across these standards. That might be kind of cool.
Would be.
Okay. Carl, any final thoughts?
Never final thoughts. No, realistically, I think the whole thing is anybody or any organization that is encouraging the risk conversation is taking the very first step toward what is a much broader risk universe. And that's really what we have to encourage. We have to get people away from that, oh, I'm not going to say anything about it because if I say it, it'll happen, that kind of dangerous, magical thinking. What we need are people who are willing to actually have the conversation.
Very true. Susan?
Yes, I kind of I mirror that in that any step, any additional step you can take, and the next step you can take is even more the better. I go back to thinking about Johnny Carson, and he used to do, what is it, the Great Carnac, where he put that folder in front of his turban thing, and then he said, he answered the thing, and then he pulled it open and it had the question, and so he was foretelling the future was the idea. And so I always thought to myself, wow, if I could look to the future, if I could foretell the future in my project, and I knew that, what could I do today that was different? And that's kind of the power that it seems crazily magical, but that's kind of power that risk management gives us. And I think that people misunderstand. They don't realize that it really has that power. We're very smart people. A lot of our projects, like Carl said, is, there's common things that go wrong all the time. So we kind of do know the things that could go wrong, and why not plan for them? I don't believe there are any lucky project managers. I think there's project managers that do risk management, and that's what makes them lucky. I've had people say to me, how come things don't go wrong on your projects? And I kind of laugh. I'm like, they do go wrong. It's just you don't see it because I respond to it quick enough, or I've been proactive in creating a contingency, having some plan for what to do when things go wrong, or even reducing the risk so it doesn't happen. So there really isn't luck. It's just good project management. And I always think another visual I have when I think of project managers is juggling. We're juggling time, cost, and scope while maintaining quality, which is customer satisfaction. And the only way to do that is to manage risk. And if you're able to deliver your project, deliver a product, service, or result on time, within budget, and within scope, then you've done risk management. And what I support you doing is taking the next step. Like, let's say you are doing all these great things with threat risk management. Well, why not look at opportunity risk management? And so you can realize more benefits for your project and more positive outcomes. So take that next step, whatever that looks like. And if you're not sure what the next step is, or you want some help, there's 3 people on this panel discussion right now, and any one of us would be happy to help you. And go out and learn more and apply what you learn. That's really the best thing you can do. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all. I mean, the best thing you can do is really build your network, right, guys?
Amen. Definitely.
So to stay connected with Essential Assets Group and the panelists, I wanted to share some information with everyone on the call today. Essential Assets Group is focused on bridging the knowledge and skills gap between technical and non-technical competencies to ensure organizational stability. And risk management is one of those ways to help ensure that. We specialize in custom knowledge-based training, industry-recognized certification-based training, and niche consulting services. In a couple of really key areas at this point, program and business management, government and service management, and information assurance and cybersecurity. The best way to stay notified about upcoming events, whether they're these types of events, the webinars, the Skill Builder webinars, programs that we're offering, blogs or resources, is to really join our community. So go ahead, join our community and stay connected to us there, as well as follow me and our company on LinkedIn. You can also stay connected directly with the panelists from today, Doug Brown, Carl Pritchard, and Susan Parente. You can find them on LinkedIn. We have their LinkedIn profiles connected here. And you can also purchase the Global Hotspots book. It's available on Amazon. There's a Kindle Unlimited or a paperback option. There's a link for you, but I'm sure you can find it really easy with a search. And we are offering a special offer today. If you contact one of the panelists directly, you can actually purchase a signed copy of the book, which is really, I think, an added bonus and benefit if it's something that you'd like to have on your shelf. So I don't see any questions coming in right now. What I can do is open it back up again and just let you guys know we're here to answer questions. I'll leave the screen up in case you guys want to get any of that contact information. And if we don't have any audience questions, I mean, I would love to open it back up for any practical tips or things like that that the panelists could offer.
I think part of this is just salespersonship. If you really want to sell it across an enterprise, you go up the food chain and you tell management just how brilliant they would be if they were to enable, to engage, to open the door for a good, solid risk conversation. So one of my financial services clients actually does that extraordinarily well, because that's exactly what happened. They had a minimal risk practice, then they started getting slammed in some of their compliance overviews, and they said, what should we do? And the person who was running the show at the time was just a genius, because they went in and they said, actually, you've been pushing for this for years. So rather than saying, you're not doing enough on risk, say, you know what you've been doing right. I think the more we can do to reinforce what people are doing right, the more we're going to win hearts. The more we win hearts, the more capable we are at actually getting everybody on board. And that's ultimately what we're after.
Yeah, I think I would add to that one of the challenges is making sure that the environment exists so that you're not asking people to do something that they think is crazy talk. And one of the big challenges when we talk about risks is you have a basic work breakdown structure or a project rolled out plan or however you're going to manage it. And then you start packing risks on top of that. And if that's exposed in a fully transparent way, the project becomes, pick a number, 1 million base cost plus 300,000 for various risk mitigations and uncertainty buffers and so on and so forth. That's really difficult for many organizations to absorb because either project managers are often afraid correctly that if they expose it like that, the 300,000 will just get taken back away again. And there's no real means of incorporating the risk considerations in it. So that is one thing you do have to work out up front, is if you're going to bring these kind of thoughts into the picture, how are they going to come in a way that's not going to be counterproductive? Because the organization naturally wants to start as many things as it can, And the more risk loading you do, the less things it can start, which is okay. But then when, especially in the government setting, when you come to the end of the year, the risk didn't happen and now you didn't spend all your money and now what? So you have to get over that hurdle.
That kind of reminds me, I was reading a book recently about finance and personal finances, and I think the term is asymmetric risk loading or something to that degree. Probably said it wrong, not a finance expert. But they were basically talking about taking risks where the threat or the downside is less than the upside. So that's the asymmetry. And it seems a bit implausible, but I would say that why are we doing projects if the negatives outweigh the positives? So one of the places where I think risk management is often lacking is in project initiation and actually looking at the numbers, looking at the return on investment, looking at what are the benefits of this project versus what are the potential negative outcomes. And a lot of times I think some projects are started without people looking at that. And then halfway through the project, they kind of realize, wow, we're throwing a lot of money at something that's not going well. And what is our gain? What is the positive outcome that we're rooting for here? Obviously, some projects have a greater risk, but that greater risk, threat risk, should come with a greater opportunity outcome. So, I kind of think to myself, maybe as project managers, we need to think more like financial people do when it comes to risk management, and we need to think about, what does that balance sheet look like for a project, and keeping it in the positive so that the benefits we're realizing are greater than the issues or problems we're having and the costs associated with those issues or problems, because it's rare that a issue or problem occurred that does not cost money to fix. So there's a cost associated with that. Maybe we just need to be more like our investment manager and think more in the numbers and the value than just being focused on doing the project itself without thinking about value and benefits that result from it.
I think too, one of the things we've got to watch for is the whole notion of looking at all the, and I confess to being the first guy to do this, looking at all the micro risks that are going to happen on a project, looking at the individual risks rather than looking at the project from a very global perspective. And the funny thing is some of the tools are used really, really well by, good example, oil and gas and Monte Carlo. Oil and gas use Monte Carlo brilliantly to determine whether or not it's worth or not worth the risk. And just to give government its due, the Federal Transit Administration actually did a great job of deploying Monte Carlo on the Baltimore light rail system. And I thought what they did was sheer genius, because they didn't get wrapped up in the weeds. They didn't fall down into the little nits of risk. Instead, they said, run a Monte Carlo, give us the ranges for all the work that has to be done, identify the ranges on all the work packages, run an analysis, and whatever the 75% number is, that's the budget. And whatever the 85% number is, 85% confidence, take the range between the 75 and the 85, and we're going to make that our contingency budget. And the funny thing is they came in pretty darn close to the 75% mark. It was just cool. I'm just saying, we should be leveraging the tools to take that big picture look. That's the shorthand.
I agree, Carl. I when I teach for the ACP, we get into Monte Carlo analysis, and I start to get into the math a little bit, and then my students in a class, their eyes start to glaze over, and if I'm really crazy, I start talking about stochastic math, and then their eyes roll back in their head, and at the end of it, I show them that confidence. I show them the distribution. I said, what if you could tell your customer, I have a 95% confidence that this project will be done by this date or sooner? And then there's like this, is that what that's about? Yes, that's exactly what that's about. I mean, that's project level risk management.
It
We
is.
have the power to do that, and you don't have to sit there with a calculator. There's actually software that helps you do these things, and all you need to do is enter in the uncertainty associated with all these tasks and associated with the project. And it's incredible that a lot of this math has been done by other people, Monte Carlo, whoever he is. So I think it was named after the casinos, but anyway, these things were already done for us. We just have to apply the tool, and so it makes me wonder sometimes. It's like people are taking a screwdriver and trying to put a nail in the wall. Like, why? We have this great tool that's here to help us. Why would we ignore it? You could say with 95% confidence you'll be done by some date or earlier. Why would you not want that information? It's like, I think people don't believe, they're in disbelief that we have that. We live in a society with information overload, but yet we never seem to have the right information we need at the right time to make the right decisions. So, but that's what that looks like. And it's amazing. It's amazing what we have that we're not using. And so for us as experts, like, we're watching people trying to put nails in the wall with a screwdriver, and it's very upsetting to watch when you're like, would you like to use a hammer? And they're like, no, I've got it, and you're like, okay. So
You sure you don't want a hammer?
are you sure? I'll do it for you. Just let me. It's killing me to watch you. So that's kind of how it feels. But it is fun. I mean, there's no somberness. Notice that Doug, myself, and Carl, nobody here is being somber. So I suggest, if there's somberness around risk management in your organization, to change that, because you're not going to get people coming to your meeting about risk management if you make it seem like some sort of like horrible thing, some sort of negative situation. So, put that positive spin on it and think of it in a positive way, and hopefully get more engagement from your organization. So those are my thoughts.
I think one of the things that helps to implement risk management on a more consistent and wider scale is, and we've even heard it today during the webinars, many organizations have processes where you approve projects one at a time. And that sets up a lot of the disincentives to do risk management properly. So if you don't have a good portfolio and program approach to things, where programs are coming or spawning projects to achieve their goals, then you have people making these risk and other financial claims on a project for the purpose of selling the project, as opposed to fitting it into a larger picture. And I think that is not the root of all evil, but it's the root of many evils in our execution of projects in general. Is if we start them out wrong, with the wrong criteria and with the wrong mindset, then things aren't going to get much better. And then, to the degree we can have them be part of a whole instead of a bunch of little competing empires, things will go better.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Doug, Susan, and Carl, it's been a pleasure having you on for the hour. I hope you've enjoyed talking to us and enjoyed the conversation amongst each other and amongst friends. If there are any questions, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, we will post, I guess, just a little bit of information again about Essential Assets Group, and then I'll swing over to the panelist information. And so thank you for joining.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Come find us on LinkedIn, connect with us, continue the conversation. Thank you, Allison, for hosting us.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.